Salli ala Rasulil Kareem. Amma ba'd. We are going to continue now discussing these claims regarding certain obligations upon Allah and what we, or Imam Ghazali rahimahullah and the Ash'a'ira, think regarding these obligations, particularly the moral obligations. Is Allah bound by any moral duty to behave in any such way? For example, we as humans, we might perceive things as right and wrong, and we might believe that we are morally obligated to behave in that manner. And we've already discussed that Allah, in the previous section, we made the claim that Allah is not obligated to behave in this way. So, continuing upon these lines of arguments, we are making the second claim. إن لله تعالى أن يكلف العباد ما يطيقونه وما لا يطيقونه. That Allah can obligate, He can do taklif, He can place a taklif, a burden, He can obligate humans with actions beyond their capacity and within their capacity. And وذهب المعتزلة إلى إنكار ذلك. And the Mu'tazila, they reject this, which holds that they believe that moral responsibility requires ability. They argue that one can only be obligated to do a thing which they have the capacity for fulfilling. However, here we are not speaking about whether Allah has or hasn't obligated us with things which we can or cannot do. Rather, we are speaking of the logical possibility. Is it necessary upon Allah as a being which is all powerful, that is all knowing? Was it necessary and wajib upon Him to make it so that He must, in fact, place upon the obligations those obligations which they can complete? So, the Ahl Sunnah, we say taklif is valid regardless of human capacity. So the Ash'ari position is, regardless of human capacity, taklif is valid. The Mu'tazila position is moral obligations must be grounded in ability. Allah cannot command that which the servant or the human cannot fulfill. So what does taklif mean? So here we are describing taklif as a type of kalam that involves demanding an action. And that's what we say here. وَمُعْتَقِدُ أَهْلِ السُّنَّةِ أَنَّ التَّكْلِيفَ لَهُ حَقِيقَةٌ فِي نَفْسِهِ وَهُوَ أَنَّهُ كَلَامٌ. So the Ahl Sunnah believe that taklif, it is a speech. And the source of this kalam, the mutakallim, is Allah, and the recipient are the rational agents, the mukallaf, who are capable of understanding the speech. So, what is the content of the speech? The actions commanded. So these actions which are commanded upon us, they only need to be conceptually intelligible. The mafhum, the concepts themselves, we must be able to understand them. This does not necessarily imply, or this does not imply that these commands must be necessarily possible for us to complete. So here it says, وَشَرْطُهُ أَن يَكُونَ مَفْهُومًا فَقَطْ. That the condition of this speech is that it must only be comprehensible. It has meaning. وَأَمَّا كَوْنُهُ مُمْكِنًا فَلَيْسَ بِشَرْطٍ لِتَحْقِيقِ الْكَلَامِ فَإِنَّ التَّكْلِيفَ كَلَامٌ. As for being possible, it is not a condition for something to be a kalam. What we're saying here is this kalam itself, which Allah commands us to do, to be a kalam, it is not necessary that it is something which is possible to perform. So this kalam can be from a person that is superior to someone that is inferior to them, and this will be known as an amr, and you'll categorize that as a taklif, a command. If you are asking or giving this kalam, you're trying to place this obligation upon someone who is your equal, then this will only be a request, an iltimas. And if you are trying to obligate something upon someone that is superior to you, then this is a dua, a supplication. And all involve an iqtisad, a demand or expectation. They only differ in the status of the individual making that claim or making that initial demand. So what we're arguing here, essentially from the Ash'ari position, is if taklif upon a person that is incapable is logically coherent. So that's what I need to stress here. So all we're saying here is that impossible something is impossible in itself, be that he. For example, black and white together is a contradiction. So something is impossible either due to a context or a condition. But it does. So basically, when something is intrinsically incoherent, and that's what we mean by impossibility. However, I make the statement of taklif being placed upon someone that is incapable, that's a logically coherent statement, and therefore it's something which is within the realm of possibility. So so it's intelligible to say to a paralyzed person to stand. Of course, the statement is maybe intelligible, it has meaning, but it cannot be performed. So this is what we are trying to say from the Ash'ari position. Is it logically possible for Allah to make these commands? So once again, the definition of the caliph is iqtisad qa'imun bi nafs, is an internal demand, and it isn't just something verbal. It can exist even in the speaker if the recipient is incapable. So it can exist within the speaker. Once again, we're repeating the same issue. Existence of the internal demand doesn't require possibility of execution. So this is the same. So the Mu'tazila view it's ethically unjust, it's qabih for Allah to command that which cannot be fulfilled. And Imam Ghazali refutes this by saying moral categories like istihsan, like moral approval, or qubh, ugliness, do not apply to Allah. Allah is beyond these utilitarian reasonings. For example, Allah acts without a gharad, a purpose. So Allah acts without purpose. So this is actually a quite a big contention as well. Recently there was this video with that with Jake Brancatella. He was having this discussion with Sheikh Nuruddin, and then one of the contentions he brought about was with regards to the Ash'ari position of Allah not acting with regards to purposes, and this is referring to moral obligations which are necessary upon creations. So Allah doesn't have to act upon this utilitarian reasoning, because Allah doesn't act for his self-interest because he doesn't have anything to gain. When we act for our self-interest, then it's because we have things to gain. Agharad, this is what we refer to by agharad, so a purpose, something that we want to achieve. And when we want to achieve something, it's because we are lacking, we are deficient. So Allah is perfect, and everyone agrees that Allah is perfect, and this is what we mean when we say that Allah doesn't act for these agharad. أما الإنسان العاقل المضبوط بغالب الأمر فقد يستقبح ذلك وليس ما يستقبح من العبد يستقبح من الله تعالى. So just because the servant might find something reprehensible because of what it has a detrimental effect on their self-interest, this does not necessarily imply that whatever they find detrimental or reprehensible is reprehensible from the perspective of Allah, because Allah is the one that creates everything after all. So, and this is the claim that they make, that if Allah acts and there's no purpose, then there's no benefit in it. So there's no purpose in sending a messenger, there's no meaning or benefit into it. And the response is, just because it's unknown to us, it does not mean that there is no benefit at all. And the example here is given is that when Ibrahim alayhi salam was given the command to sacrifice, so Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam was given the command to sacrifice his son, but he never fulfilled, and there was wisdom there. And so even though it may have appeared reprehensible upon first hearing, for example, if anyone hears this, that Ibrahim alayhi salam or a person was commanded by a god to sacrifice their son, that they might feel some kind of disgust towards this. And this is very common today, and this is a polemic used against the Abrahamic faiths and religions. However, Allah's purpose wasn't, Allah did not intend the benefit. There was benefit in this, and it wasn't for the sake of the command being fulfilled, but rather it was for a trial or the expression of divine will or some other hidden purpose. And when we say purpose here, we aren't talking about gharad. By this I mean to express his commands. And even unfulfilled obligations, because this obligation was unfulfilled, had the ability to foster belief in the divine command. Or another example is instructing and giving the command for Abu Jahl even to bring faith. How, even though the report was given that he would not believe, but the reason for doing this was to express the actual command itself, which is for all of humanity. So just because someone says that Allah gives a command which seems to have no self-serving purposes, this does not mean that there are no benefits. The benefits might be that which Allah has knowledge of, and He knows how they will. He knows what the outcomes of these commands will be. And then someone also says, what has no benefit is useless, is futile. So what has no benefit is abath. So this is da'wah thaniya regarding this. إنما لا فائدة فيه فهو عبث فهو تكرير عبارة. So response is, this is circular. Absurdity first must be defined. If by absurd you mean pointless, then that begs the question. If you mean logically incoherent, it is not. The speech or the act, the speech of Allah is intelligible. So when you say that Allah, so it's just a repetition really, and this was answered in the previous response already. So if you say that Allah's commands, they, even if they are directed towards someone that is incapable of fulfilling them, like we said, Abu Jahl was incapable of believing, even though he was given the command of belief. There was another reason for Allah giving this command. Likewise, Ibrahim alayhi salam, even though Allah did not intend for him to sacrifice his son, there was another reason for giving the command. So this has already been answered. So to say again, because this is another contention, because the first one, what's the difference? The first one was there is no benefit in it whatsoever. So what am I saying? There is no benefit in giving a command to someone incapable whatsoever, and we've already responded to that. And the second criticism is that whatever has no benefit within it is futile, but we've already said there is benefit within it. So now you have to redefine what you mean by futile. And so we've already expressed how there may be benefit that we aren't aware of, and we've already expressed that if by absurd you mean logically incoherent, it doesn't make any logical sense for Allah to give an instruction to someone that is incapable. But we've already said that logical incoherence is referring to an impossibility, and we've just defined this, and Imam Ghazali does this as well. He defines what he means by logical impossibility in page 112, where he gives the example of white and black not being able to exist in one place at one time in the same way in every respect. And what we're saying here is that Allah's speech itself is intelligible, so it's not logically impossible. So the third point is that the refutation or contention is إن العبث على الله تعالى محال, that any futile act, so futility upon Allah is impossible. So Allah cannot do anything that's futile, which is meaningless. But God knew the kuffar would not believe, so commanding them is pointless. And we respond that denying the obligation on them is the same as denial of revealed law, Sharia. So basically, people who deny that disbelievers were commanded to believe are rejecting the teachings of the Quran, because the Quran does command everyone to believe. So if you say that Allah doesn't command the kuffar to believe, then you're rejecting the teachings of the religion. So you have to say in that case that even though Allah has perfect knowledge that these people won't believe in the future, He still is commanding them to believe. So therefore He is instructing He is instructing people to do something which He knows they won't be able to fulfill. So this is because in Islam all humans, including non-believers, are commanded to believe. So this is the puzzle. If Allah knows that a person will not believe and His knowledge is always correct, then how can we say that this person was really able to believe? This creates a tension. Allah commands belief from someone whom He already knows will never believe. So the Mu'tazilas, they try to say, even if someone has the ability to do something like believe, that doesn't mean that they will actually do it. The ability needs other things like the intention and the will and the path, etc., to do it as well, for it to be fulfilled as well. But if we say a person had the full ability to believe, then that means it was possible that they could have done it. But if they had, it would mean Allah's knowledge would turn out to be wrong. And that can't happen because Allah's knowledge is perfect and cannot change. So that makes it impossible, not just unlikely, for that person to believe, because it would contradict Allah's unchanging knowledge. Therefore, it seems that Allah is commanding someone to do something to believe, and even though it's impossible for them to do so. So even though the Mu'tazila try to get away with this by saying, actually, just because Allah's given the command of believing, that doesn't that's because they have the ability to do so. But just because you have the ability to do so, it is not sufficient enough to actually fulfill that command, because they need to have the intention, etc., and all of these other things. So they are liable for those other reasons. Those people are liable because of their will and the intentions, etc. But what we're saying is, if Allah knew that they wouldn't believe, but then for somehow they were able to believe, then that would mean that Allah's knowledge wasn't correct, and that's a problem. So it seems that Allah is commanding them to do something which He knows they wouldn't do. So, and remember we said that something that when we look at events from the perspective of Allah's knowledge, then they are necessary. And if it's accepted that Allah commands what is impossible in this case, then there's no real difference between something that is impossible due to any other reason, like Allah's knowledge, and something impossible in itself, like a logical contradictions. So this kind of proves this second point where we said that Allah can command the believers or can command people to do things which they cannot, which they are incapable of doing so. And then we go to Ada'wa Thalitha, the third claim. But actually, before going there, there are some good analogies here. So a command isn't the same as an expectation of outcome. So just because Allah commands something, it doesn't mean that He has an expectation that you will fulfill this command. For example, you might tell a child not to lie, even though we know that they are going to continue doing so. So Allah knows what we're going to do, but He still gives it for some other reason, and some other benefit, as we previously mentioned. So intentional speech maintains its ontological integrity regardless if it was fulfilled or not. So we're saying that this command of Allah, it's still logically coherent. So Allah's commands function as manifestations of divine will. They are not contingent on human capacity or results. So this teleological suspension of humans' purposes does not equal divine purposes. So the conclusion is taklif ma la yutaq is logically possible. It's not ethically problematic when we consider Allah's divine transcendence. And this is the Ash'ari position. And this reinforces Allah's absolute freedom, His ikhtiyar, His will, and His non-contingency on creation. So the third claim now is ندعي أن الله تعالى قادر على إيلام الحيوان البريء من الجنايات ولا يلزم عليه ثواب. So the third claim is Allah may inflict pain upon innocents and He might not give them compensation, and it isn't necessary upon Him to reward as well. And the Mu'tazila, of course, they disagree with this. إن ذلك محال لأنه قبيح. The reason for this is because they have this moral standard which says that this is evil or bad, and therefore Allah cannot do this. This is like a Christian concept as well. A lot of Christians, except Calvinists, they believe that Allah or God doesn't create evil things. But here the Ash'ari position is divine power, qudra, extends to causing suffering for sinless beings as well, like animals, infants, the insane. So we witness this all the time. We see, you could say, quote unquote, bad things happening to innocents. So there's no intrinsic obligation on Allah either to reward or resurrect them afterwards. We're not saying that Allah won't, but we're talking about logically possible. Is it logically necessary for Allah to behave in this manner? So the Mu'tazila, they object that unmerited pain is qabih. So giving pain for no reason isn't good, and this is impossible for a wise and just God. So this leads to two things. So if you take the Mu'tazila position to its logical conclusion, then this would imply that every thing, like a flea and that, you could think of these microscopic organisms that, like germs and bacteria, they have to be resurrected and compensated as well. Or you have to embrace at-tanasukh, some kind of reincarnation. And there are positions that even in the in the Islamic tradition, you'll find some outlier groups which believed in some kind of reincarnation, that the souls would reincarnate in some other kind of body to receive a pleasure because of the pain they received in this world, which was unwarranted pain. And Imam Ghazali says that these are just untenable, and the rebuttal is, so first and foremost, it's obvious that they are innocent people or innocent creatures, and they go through suffering and pain. So this shows that it is within Allah's power to cause these things to happen. And then if you say that it's an obligation upon Allah to reward, then once again we just have to go back through the issue of wujub, and we already said that it is an wajib upon Allah to do these things, because we said we defined wajib and moral obligation in the moral landscape. When we said an obligation, it refers to something which is done for one's own self-interests, And of course, Allah is already perfect and complete. He doesn't have any of these self-interests. And someone asks, this contradicts hikmah as well, wisdom, divine wisdom. This is only if hikmah means more than perfect knowledge of order. Right? Any other sense is semantic excess. So you have to first define what you mean by hikmah. And this is another issue that Salafis put upon the Ash'ira. They say, oh, if Allah doesn't believe, Allah doesn't act for these purposes external to Him, then there's no wisdom in His acts. There was no wisdom in sending messengers or prophets. But what does hikmah mean? We defined hikmah previously as when someone performs something with precision and perfection. This is what it means to. This is what hikmah is referring to, when there are no mistakes. And that's why I also refer to that hadith where we said that person, when they always make mistakes, then they gain wisdom. This is because now that they've made mistake over mistake, when they perform these actions, now they know what to watch out for. There will be precision and perfection within their actions. If you mean anything else by hikmah, then that's excessive. That's semantic excess. That's an additional meaning, and we don't have to hold to that. And then someone might also argue that it's an unjust. This is unjust for Allah to do. So it's referring to this theodicy. But we say that if you say something is zulm, unjust, this presupposes violating another's property or a superior's command. And neither of these apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does it mean to be unjust? It means وَضُعُ الشَّيْءِ فِي غَيْرِ مُحَلِّهِ, misappropriation. However, Allah is the one that creates everything, and He is the one that puts everything in the correct places, because this is what it means to be hikmah. He creates everything with precision, teleology. He is the one that gave the placement of a thing, or He is the one that determined the placement of a thing so that it fulfills its purpose. So how can Allah be doing zulm? And also zulm is referring to violating someone else's property, but everything belongs to Allah, or a superior's command. This is also zulm, but of course there's nothing superior to Allah. So injustice is negated by absence of its conditions. So it's not by some independent moral law of Allah. If you say that Allah is doing zulm, oppression, then you have to insist on some kind of moral standard that exists external to Allah which binds Him. But we already said that there is nothing which binds Allah. There's no kind of moral command that binds Allah, and He cannot do zulm because of the conditions of zulm are absent from Him. And of course in the Quran it says وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ, and your Lord does not do wrong upon His servants. He's saying here that there's a complete negation of zulm from Allah, the same way that you cannot say a wall is ignorant, or you can't say that the blowing of a wind is futile, because zulm can only occur, you can only conceive of zulm occurring when it is someone breaching the property of another, and this cannot be conceived of for Allah. أو يمكن أن يكون عليه أمر فيخالف فعله أمر غيره, or it is only possible to conceive of when someone gives an instruction or a command and then they go against this command. Like there might be a law in place in the country, the government has a law, and then you break the law. That's zulm. That's called doing something wrong. But you can't do something wrong if there is no one superior to you. So we said zulm, oppression, is negated from Allah because of the absence of its conditions for him. So and then something very interesting he says here: if someone gives an explanation of a zulm, if someone defines or gives an explanation of a zulm other than what we've already said, then this is a meaning فهو غير مفهوم. This isn't the conceptual meaning that we understand. ولا يتكلم فيه بنفي ولا إثبات, and we won't speak with regards to it. We would not deny it or we will not affirm it, and this is returning to tafweed al-ma'na. So we know what zulm means from its usage in the language and the dictionary. But if you mean something else by zulm, then we just do tafweed, we remain silent upon this. This is a beautiful part of the Ash'ari creed, which allows us to hold this kind of tafweed, which is where we rely and we completely submit our understanding and knowledge to Allah. So the fourth claim is ندعي أنه لا يجب عليه رعاية الأصلح لعباده. Though Allah does not need to do what is bad aslah for his creatures. He doesn't need to do what is best for them. بَلْ هُوَ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ, and this is quoted by the Quran, that Allah only needs to do what He wishes. He only does what He wishes. وَيَحْكُمُ بِمَا يُرِيدُ, and He commands what He wants. خِلَافًا لِلْمُعْتَزِلَةِ, and the Mu'tazila, once again, they disagree with this. So there's no compulsory principle upon Allah. Allah does what He wills. He judges as He wishes. The Mu'tazila, they say that this is necessary for Allah to act for the maximum benefit for creatures. So He must act for creaturely good, and this is binding upon Allah. So what are the arguments against this kind of obligation? Once again, it's the same proofs which negate any wujub upon Allah, as we've already explained several times. And we've also said that the observed world contains clear cases where the best interests of creation are absent. So you could say there's a thought experiment which is quite famous against the Mu'tazila. So there's 3 children. One dies when he is an infancy, and then he gains a rank in paradise. But because he could not live longer, he cannot gain a higher rank. So he could ask Allah, Allah, why did you extend my life so I could earn a higher rank? Then there's another one that reaches puberty and dies a Muslim, and he actually receives a higher rank. There's a third child that reaches puberty but dies a disbeliever, so he has eternal hell. So he could ask then, why did you not let me die in my childhood, so I could have gained a rank in paradise, even if it was less, even if it was a lower rank. And both these cases where the child dies, or where the disbeliever as an adult dies, they could rationally protest against this principle where Allah must act in for the best interest of creation. So, and there are no real coherent Mu'tazila answers to this. If Allah must act in the best interest for creation, then both of these contentions arise. That why did you not let me live, and so I could do more good deeds to attain a higher rank in paradise? Or why did you not let me die when I was young, so that I would not commit evil when I grew older? And so we find that in the real world there are such cases where children die all the time, or disbelievers die all the time. So Allah's acts are not tethered to these creaturely interests. So basically, divine freedom, ikhtiyar, is absolute. Moral theology binding on humans. So this moral framework which we find, and it is inherently created within us, it is binding upon us, but it's not something that binds Allah. So if you say something is best for creatures, it may be granted or withheld without injustice or logical contradictions. Either Allah does act for the interest of the creatures, or He doesn't, but there are no logical contradictions that would arise if you say that Allah doesn't act for the interest of the creation. Okay, so we deny any external standards over Allah. There's a rejection of moral realism binding on the divine, so which is really to do with this voluntarism. And there's a theodicy here which says that Allah employs ownership argument, so there's no property outside Allah. So this neutralizes the problem of innocent suffering, because it's only zulm if those creatures belong to someone other than Allah. But you have to give if you have a different definition of zulm, then of course we remain silent upon this at the moment. Of course, there are different arguments for the problems of suffering, but we will focus on what Imam Ghazali is saying at the moment, and we might come to those issues at another time. And leave it that for now. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.